Hey there, Ryan from Boolean Development here, and I want to pick up talking about primitive data types. Last time we talked about the data types that cover integer numbers and floating point numbers. Today I want to talk about Booleans and I want to talk about chars. That's characters. However you want to pronounce that, when it's written out like that, it's char in my head and that's stuck and that's what it is. Not going to get hung up on that. So if we look first at Booleans, you can see that I've written out a Boolean data type with a variable called condition, and I've set it equal to true. I've assigned it the value of true, right? And then I've created another one, Boolean condition 2, and I've basically assigned that one false. That's what Booleans do. For today, all we need to understand is that Booleans are trues or falses, and we can use those to do a lot of different things in code. I don't want to get too far into that because as we move through the course, you're going to see these pop up over and over and over again. So I don't want to belabor a point that we'll revisit and we'll get covered by the time you need to know it, right? Second, let's look at chars. And this one is a little bit confusing sometimes for students because when they first interact with this, they go, okay, I fundamentally understand a char is just one letter. And that's correct, right? You see there I have first letter and last letter as variable names. They are char data types, and I have assigned them the value respectively capital B and lowercase n. Something to understand about both Booleans and chars, and really everything about coding, is that all of the stuff in Java, all of the stuff in computers really boils down to numbers, right? And if you go back and watch my video on how that is all compiled in the JVM and goes into bytecode and so on and so forth, and you want to go read about all of that, you can. But just trust me that basically everything in code boils down to numbers for us to understand. So essentially the value for false is 0, right? And the way that you can remember that is it mimics a transistor, right? Which has two values. It can either be turned on or it can be turned off. So if you look around your room right now and you find a power switch, we'll often have a 0 and a 1 on it, right? And the 1 means that it's turned on and the 0 means that it's turned off, right? So now you know what those symbols mean if you didn't before. But basically understand that that's what Booleans do. The true and the false is readable for us. That's syntactic language for us to understand as programmers. The computer is really just seeing whether or not it should continue to pass a condition or do something based on that true or false value, right? That's all it's doing. Chars do a similar thing, but chars have specific assigned values based off of Unicode, right? So if you look up like a Unicode or an ASCII table and you start to look at those, you're going to really quickly figure out, okay, this makes sense. There's a number that's assigned to each letter, and basically they're charted out and it starts with capitals and then it goes into lowercase and then it goes into special characters and things like that, right? So the way I always remember it is that we start out with capital A at the number 65 and then I just build up from there. That will be a programming question if you stick long enough with Java. Whether you're going to a school competition or whether you're interviewing, there will be a point that you're asked a question where the easiest way to deal with something is to remember, hey, capital A is 65, I can do a little bit of arithmetic and solve this problem really fast, right? So just to give you an example of that and kind of show you, what this means, we could theoretically take something like char and say, I'm just gonna call this char letter, right? And I could go down here and say, okay, assign letter the value 65, right? And you notice that there's not an error right now, right? There's no squiggly red line under that code. And if I were to take a print statement and say, let's print out the output for this and see what letter is, and I go ahead and run that, you see that I get a printed out A, right? And that seems really strange until you go look at that chart and you go, well, yeah, the 65 is for me, the human, to understand in my brain. It's syntactic language. But the computer understands the number 65 as, hey, represented as this symbol for the human, right? So you can do math with these, you can add these together, and so on and so forth. Now, I know some of you having started learning Java and you viewed some things in my course, you've come across strings and you may be wondering, well, aren't strings primitive data types? Because I started learning them from the beginning. I too started learning about strings in the beginning, but there was something that I didn't know at that time. Strings are not going to be part of our primitive data types, and you can tell really quickly, we'll eventually get into this. But if you took string and you type it out, you notice that it's very different from these data types. These are lowercase, right? lowercase, and then you get here and it's uppercase. And I could say something like name, and I could put my first name, and I could end that. No error, we're all good there. That's because a string is a class, right? So if you want to go back and watch the video on classes and objects and what that essentially means as far as classes and objects go ahead and do that. But we'll cover this eventually as we move through the course. No worries about that. So basically just understand that strings are not primitive data types. So we're going to take those out of there. Do notice though that when I typed out that string, it had the double quotes, right? Chars are only going to work with a single quote. So if I put 2, you're going to see that I get an error, and it's basically telling me, hey, you're trying to write a string and you said that it was a char data type. So what I want to do, I want to stick with my single quotes. So to just recap, you've learned today what Booleans and chars are. Booleans are just true and false values that we can make decisions based off of, and chars are numeric values that represent letters and symbols to us so that code can be readable by humans. All right? Thanks for stopping by. You could be anywhere today and you were here. I appreciate that. I'll see you in the next video.